Good morning, year nines. Hope you're all well and staying safe. Today, we're going to be talking about what resources do we humans get from ecosystems. But before we move on to discussing that topic, please pause the video and have a go at these 7 questions. Let's discuss the answers to those questions. The first one it says, which organism in the food chain are most likely to suffer the serious effects of bioaccumulation? It can be either the secondary consumer, if that's the highest point in the food chain, or the tertiary consumer, or what we'll call the top predator. Those are the ones which are most likely to suffer serious effects from bioaccumulation. Give an example of a parasitic relationship. A parasitic relationship, first of all, is where two organisms, one benefits and the other, in the process of benefiting, harms the other. So let's look at one example. It's a tapeworm inside our intestine. Tapeworms in the intestine of animals eat the digested food, and hence you go on hungry easily. Tapeworms can actually kill their victims. Lice, fleas on animal skin. Of course, if you have head lice, the lice feeds on your blood, so that can be very discomforting and yeah, because they bite your skin. So that is another example of a parasitic relationship. Give examples of pollutants that can cause bioaccumulation in the environment. We've talked about DDT, we've talked about mercury, we've talked about PCBs, or you can call them pesticides or herbicides in general. It says, how does the pesticide DDT cause a reduction in the population of birds of prey? This we got to remember that the DDT makes their eggshells too thin. Hence, the eggs do not mature and the eggs break easily and the babies are not born. Hence, the population of the birds decrease. So it weakens their eggshells. You got to remember this one. Give an example of a producer. Well, there are two examples I've given, plants and algae. But if you go deep into the volcanic vents, deep under the ocean, then we have what we call organisms there, which make their own food by the process of chemosynthesis. Do not forget that. So chemosynthesis, they are also producers in that area, deep under the seabed in volcanic vents. Okay, what happens to the biomass at each stage in the food chain? This was a starter question in the last video from me as well. I'm repeating it again because it's one of the things you need to remember. The biomass decreases as you move from one trophic level to a higher trophic level, from a lower trophic level to a higher trophic level, the biomass decreases. And how is energy in food chains lost? Energy in food chain is lost by respiration and heat. I explained that in the last video. So please, you can go back to my last video, threats to biodiversity, and study these. Now, before I move on with the lesson, may I inform you that again, towards the end of this term, the last week, I am going to give you a quiz, which is going to be your end of topic test. It's going to have something between 20 or 25 questions. Similarly, or probably I might even go up to 30 questions. And I'm going to specifically use questions which most students got wrong. For instance, if there are 100 students who attempted a quiz, if there are only 20 who got a particular question wrong and correct, that is the question I'll be going in for. Those are the sort of questions, the misconceptions. Those are the questions I'm going to use in the quiz, the final end of topic quiz. So please be aware of that. The questions you get wrong, study their correct answers and note that down. Okay, last lesson we were looking at threats to biodiversity. We looked at habitat loss. We talked about deforestation, forest fires, and next is invasive species. I've not talked about that, but I know Mr. Shannon has mentioned briefly about that. Invasive species, one of the examples we have is the example of the gray squirrel and the red squirrel. The gray squirrel is from North America, is much bigger than the red squirrel. The red squirrel was a native here in the UK, originally here in UK and Europe. But when the gray squirrel was introduced into the wild in the 1870s, slowly the gray squirrel took over and there are very few red squirrels around. So that is an example of what an invasive species can do. So the native of this country, which is the red squirrel, has been the numbers has decreased greatly, and they are actually considered kind of endangered now. But today we want to look at population increase specifically, how we humans benefit from ecosystems and how that, of course, poses a threat to ecosystems. Later, we'll look at pollution again and overexploitation. Okay, let's move on. So, human population growth. The human population is growing at an exponential rate. So, what does that mean when we say we're growing at an exponential rate? If you look at the graph, you see just before the 2000 thereabouts, there is a high rise, sudden rise in the population. This shape of this graph is what is called exponential graph. Please note that word, it is a quiz question. In 2012, the human population exceeded 7 billion for the first time. And what caused that is that there are more people born than die. 75 million more people are born than die. And there are four reasons for these. The first one, we have a better healthcare system now. Better healthcare, so people are living longer. Life expectancy has been greatly increased. The second reason is we're developing new medicines, and so people we don't die from fatal diseases as people used to before. Remember those plagues and things that have happened, the Spanish flu and all of those things that happened back then. A lot of people died from some of those things, but now we have cures for them, and so they don't kill us anymore. Farmers are able to produce more food using new breeds and equipment. Back some time ago, people were only farming using hoe and spade. They were doing things manually. Now we have a lot of machine, so people can farm acres, tens, hundreds of acres of land in a day because they're using machine, they're using tractors. So all of that has helped to produce and meet the food demand, hence population increase. Also, some religions do not permit the use of contraception. So you find out that some families are very large, having above 10 kids in the family. Okay, so those are the four things. Please feel free to pause, write them down. You need to know these four reasons why the population has increased. So, what services do we get from the ecosystems? The first one, we get supporting services. Of course, we've looked at the fact that birds and insects helps us to pollinate flowers, and those pollinated flowers or things, they give us a wide variety of food choice. If birds and insects don't help with pollination, then we have a limited choice. Only food that has self-pollinating plants or wind pollinating plants can we can thrive from. Otherwise, we need the bees, we need the birds to help us with that. Creation of habitat, cycling of essential substances. Later on, we will talk about the water cycle, we'll talk about the carbon cycle, and so on. Now, provision of services. This is quite important because the ecosystem provides us with food, materials for building our houses and things, fuel, biofuel for our cars for electricity generation, medicine from the leaves or tree bark and things like that. So there's a lot of services we humans benefit from ecosystems. Regulating services, of course, ecosystems have bacteria that helps with decomposition, they help with climate control, cultural services. Of course, quite a number of us have been benefiting from these, especially during these difficult times of lockdown. We've been going out. I know I have been going out to the woods, going out to the pond, just sit there and just enjoy nature. So we the cultural services ecosystems provide includes enjoyment. So in some water areas, people swim in them, recreation, they do your kayaking and other things, tourism or education. So we benefit a lot from ecosystems. These are the four things, and under each category, there are several examples of benefits we humans get from ecosystems. You can pause the video and write these down. You need to know them. Right, helping hand. So please pause the video. I'm going to read through this, but you too can read through this by yourself after I've read through it and answer the three questions at the bottom. Humans can interact both positively and negatively with ecosystems. A list of human interactions is given below: creating nature reserves, removing habitats, introducing new species to habitats, breeding programs, developing vaccines, and managing land. Which interaction are most likely to have positive effects on biodiversity? From that list above, which interactions are most likely to have negative effects on biodiversity? And which interactions could have both positive and negative effects, or can have positive or negative effects on biodiversity? Please pause and try these three questions out. Okay, here are the answers. Definitely removing habitats is will only have a negative effect, but the others can have positive. For creating nature reserves is definitely a positive effect. Developing vaccines, managing the land, these are all positive. The ones that can have both positive and negative is introducing new species to a habitat. You never know what will happen, and breeding programs. Okay, here's another set of questions for you to try out. I read through. You simply need to say right or wrong, whether you're sure of it or whether you just think it is. Just say whether it's right or wrong. So, how do you feel about each statement in the table below? Ecosystems provide places for organisms to live. Right or wrong? Ecosystems have no use other than as places to live. Animals and plants benefit from ecosystems. Humans do not benefit from ecosystems. Okay, here are your answers. Of course, ecosystems have other uses other than places to live. Of course, we've talked about the fact that we can get medicine from them. We can just go there for cultural purposes. Also, humans benefit a lot from ecosystems. So number four, you cannot say it's right, it's wrong. And the last one, ecosystems does not only support organisms that live there, even if we humans don't live in that particular part or area, we still benefit from it because we go there for medicine, we go there for recreation, it provides food for us and so on, supporting services. Right, let's look at the second set of questions. It is ecosystems provide food. Ecosystems provide materials. Ecosystems provide fuel. Ecosystems provide medicines. Say whether they are right or wrong. Please feel free to pause and continue doing it or answer them. Otherwise, we proceed. Also, ecosystems have a cultural service. They are nice to look at and help with relaxation. Ecosystems provide habitats. Ecosystems break down waste. Say whether they are right or wrong. I'll display the answers. All of them are correct. All seven, you need to know that because these are basically the things ecosystems provide we humans with. So as the population grows, the pollution we produce also increases, which may cause significant issues. So we've talked about water pollution, we talked about plastics in the ocean last lesson, we talked about bioaccumulation, but also air pollution because we burn a lot of fossil fuel with our cars, electricity generation to meet the demands of electricity because there's a lot of people, so new houses are built and things like that. So Combustion of fossil fuel releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is one of the greenhouse gases, and so causes the greenhouse effect, leading to global warming. We're going to be looking at that later in this unit. We talked a bit about land pollution and the fact that all our rubbish from our homes, especially those that cannot be recycled, are dumped into what we call a landfill site, and those can bring a lot of toxic chemicals into the soil or introduce a lot of toxic chemicals into the soil. Then land use, of course, the larger the human population, the more houses that needs to be built, the more land that is needed for farming, the more land that is needed for dumping and waste. And when we keep on grabbing the lands, we have less space and fewer resources for other animals and plants. So we are actually ruining the planet. Okay, here's another thing for you to look at: threats to biodiversity. In many places, biodiversity is threatened. You can see the trees have been chopped down into logs, so ready for shipping or transportation. Several questions for you to look at. It says in many places, biodiversity is threatened. How do you feel about each statement in the table below? Destruction of habitats is one of the greatest threats to biodiversity. Say whether it is right or wrong. Pollution is a threat to biodiversity. A decrease in genetic variation will cause a decrease in biodiversity. A decrease in biodiversity is always caused by humans. Habitat loss can happen naturally, and this reduces biodiversity. Of course, all of them is correct except number 4, where it says a decrease in biodiversity is always caused by humans. No, there are several other causes that can decrease biodiversity, always caused by humans. And remember last lesson when we talked about deforestation, we discussed that some forest fires can start by lightning. So be aware of that. Okay. Again, more questions for you to practice to check your understanding about what we've learned so far. It says, as a society, we are very wasteful, and many of our actions result in the overuse of resources, so much so that many are running out. In some cases, a need for these resources threatens the life of other species. How do you feel about the statements in the table below? We must use resources in a sustainable way, right or wrong? Humans are more important than other species, so we should continue to use resources as we do now. The local people that provide the resources are to blame. It is up to them to find the solution. Please pause the video and see whether these statements are right or wrong. Okay, let's look at the next 3 statements. Any person who uses a resource which is running out is responsible and needs to be part of the solution, right or wrong. It is important to conserve resources for future generations, right or wrong. I cannot make a big difference to the problem, so there is no point doing anything. Is that the right attitude or the wrong attitude? Please answer these 3. I'll display the answers now. Of course, the first one is correct. We have to learn to use resources in a sustainable way. Humans are not more important, so we are wrong in that. The local people know we are wrong in that because it should be a collective action, all of us involved. We're right. Anybody uses a resource which is running out or causes another species to be harmed is responsible. That's why I said it's a collective action. And number 4, it is important to conserve resources for future generation. Of course, that is right. Again, I said it's a collective effort. So even though you're an individual in your own little corner, the little things each and every one of us will do can help save the environment. So That is a very negative attitude to have, to say, oh, well, I'm just a single person. I cannot make a difference. You can make a difference. Okay. Now, I've decided to give you this to do because in science, it is very important to be able to read through a bit of text and remove or extract important information that will help us understand the topic. So, I've given you this information. It's going to continue on the next slide. But as you're reading it from this slide, please note down or highlight the key information. Well, if I had given it to you in class, I would have asked you to highlight it. So I'll ask you to note down the key information as you read. I'll read it through slowly, but feel free to pause the video and read it all by yourself. Puffins are birds that spend most of their life at sea. They are excellent swimmers and feed on small fish such as herring and sand eels. They select rocky cliff tops to build their nests. Puffins reach breeding age when they are about 5 to 6 years old. Puffins lay a single egg in a burrow that they dig in the soil. If they are unable to burrow, they nest under boulders or in caves in the cliffs. Eggs are normally laid in late April or early May. The egg is incubated by both parents for 36 to 45 days. Once hatched, the parents share feeding duties until the chick is ready to leave the nest. Young birds usually leave their nest burrow when it is dark, which helps them to avoid predators. In some colonies, city lights can confuse young birds and they end up on city streets. Puffins are listed on the IUCN Red List as vulnerable. Puffin breeding populations are concentrated on a small number of sites, and environmental changes are partly responsible for a decline in puffin numbers. Changes in distribution of small fish, which puffins feed on, and the introduction of some ground predators such as rats and mink to their breeding colonies are also a threat to puffins. Pollution is also a serious hazard. In 1967, oil leaked from the Torrey Canyon and killed 85% of French puffins. Can you identify a list of reasons why puffins are endangered? You should be able to give me at least 5 reasons why they are endangered. So, puffins are endangered because one, they have few habitats, environmental changes, introduction of predators, pollution like oil spills, and food distribution, right? Because we humans overfish and then they don't have much food. And these are things you can infer get from the text, extract from the text. Okay, each of the reasons in your list could be categorized. Please use the table below to categorize your reasons. Select any 2 categories from the table and suggest ways in which humans could help with the conservation of puffins. Here are the answers. That is how you categorize the things in the table. Please pause the video to note them down. And these are suggested ways we can help. So that's the end of today's lesson. Please proceed to complete the quiz. Thank you.